The first time I heard the whistle, it did not sound like a machine. It sounded like the scream of the earth itself, torn open by steel and fire. I was a boy of 20 when I first stood on the edge of the plains, watching the black smoke curl into the sky, and I knew then that America would never be the same. I was there when the dream of the Iron Road was just a rumor in taverns, and I lived long enough to see it stretch across deserts, mountains, and rivers, binding a wounded nation together with rails of steel. The plan sounded insane when I first heard it in 1862. A railroad that would run from the Missouri River all the way to California, stitching together a country still ripped apart by civil war. Congress had passed the Pacific Railway Act, promising land and government bonds to anyone daring enough to attempt it. Two companies rose to the challenge: the Union Pacific building west from Omaha, and the Central Pacific pushing east from Sacramento. They were supposed to meet somewhere in the vast wilderness between. I signed up with the Union Pacific crew. The pay was meager, the conditions harsh, but the promise of steady work, and the chance to be part of something so colossal, pulled me in. The first days were a blur of sweat and curses. The clang of hammers striking spikes became the drumbeat of our lives. We rose before dawn, our tents stiff with frost in winter or choking with dust in summer, and we swung those hammers until our hands blistered raw. Whiskey dulled the pain, but never enough. We were a strange army, drawn from every shore. Irish immigrants poured in, singing old songs as they laid track, their laughter as quick as their tempers. Freedmen, formerly enslaved men, sought wages and dignity on the line. Veterans of the Civil War, too restless to return to farms, carried their discipline and their scars westward. And then there were the Chinese, thousands of them, working for the Central Pacific. They were smaller men, quiet, disciplined, paid less, and often despised by the others, but they accomplished feats no one else dared attempt. The Sierra Nevada was their crucible. I once traveled west and saw them suspended in wicker baskets over sheer cliffs, drilling holes into solid granite by hand to pack with black powder and, later, the volatile new nitroglycerin. Many never climbed back up. When avalanches roared down the mountainsides in winter, whole camps were swallowed. In the tunnels, candles flickered against walls slick with moisture, air choking with smoke. It took them years to bore through just a few miles of mountain, but they did it with relentless determination. Few Americans today realize that without Chinese labor, the railroad might have stalled in the Sierras forever. The Union Pacific's challenge was different. Our enemy was distance. Mile after mile of open prairie, endless grasslands, rivers wide and wild. We fought not stone but space itself. The Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho watched us with growing anger as our iron road cut through their hunting grounds. There were raids, ambushes, attacks on work crews. Sometimes we worked with rifles leaning against the ties, listening for hoofbeats. For them, the railroad was not progress but invasion. Looking back, I cannot blame them. Life in the camps was its own kind of battle. Food was often rotten. Pork salted until it was nearly inedible, bread crawling with weevils. Coffee boiled black was the only comfort. Men gambled away their wages by lamplight, fought over whiskey, or stumbled into the arms of traveling merchants and women who followed the line. Disease spread quickly in the tents. Cholera, dysentery, fever. Graves multiplied, simple wooden crosses leaning in the wind. And yet, when the whistle blew in the morning, we rose again, because there was no other choice. The camps gave birth to hell on wheels. Entire towns on wagons that moved with the tracks. Saloons, gambling halls, brothels, even makeshift theaters followed us like shadows. Respectable folks called them dens of sin, but for many men they were the only taste of comfort, however fleeting, after months of dust and toil. Shootouts were common, fortunes lost in a night, lives ended over a card game. The railroad was not just steel and timber. It was a rolling storm of humanity, wild and untamed. Corruption tainted the project as much as sweat. The credit mobilier scandal saw politicians and investors lining their pockets, building cheap, crooked track to claim more government money. Some sections were so poorly laid that engines jumped the rails. But we kept working because the paychecks, however small, fed our families, and because the promise of the railroad was bigger than the greed of men. We faced rivers that defied imagination. Wooden trestle bridges rose across chasms, trembling under the weight of locomotives. I remember standing on one as a train thundered past, the timbers creaking, the whole structure swaying as if it might collapse into the canyon. Snow sheds, long wooden tunnels, were built across the Sierras to shield tracks from avalanches, miles of lumber protecting steel. The landscape itself seemed to resist us, and yet rail by rail we forced it to yield. The Chinese workers, often overlooked, showed remarkable courage beyond their labor. In 1867, when their wages were withheld, thousands organized a strike, refusing to lift a pick or hammer. For a week they held fast, demanding equal pay to Irish crews. The companies starved them out, cutting off food supplies, but the strike remains one of the earliest organized labor movements in the West, though history rarely remembers it. Many of those men died unmarked, their bones carried back to China in small wooden boxes, or buried beneath the mountains they carved open. I will never forget April 28, 1869. The Union Pacific crew, driven by pride and competition, laid 10 miles of track in a single day, a record never equaled. I swung a hammer that day until my vision blurred, the rhythm of spike, rail carrying us like a machine. By sundown, 10 miles of gleaming steel stretched behind us, the men collapsing in exhaustion but roaring in triumph. That night, the campfires burned bright, whiskey flowed, and for a moment we believed ourselves invincible. Finally, the two roads approached each other in the Utah desert. Promontory Summit barren, windswept, but destined for history. On May 10, 1869, dignitaries gathered in fine suits, while workers in ragged clothes stood in the shadows. Two locomotives faced each other like iron beasts. The Union Pacific's number 119 and the Central Pacific's Jupiter. A polished golden spike was presented, more ceremony than substance, but it carried the weight of the nation's eyes. Telegraph wires had been strung so the moment could be shared across the country. As the hammer struck the spike, the word "done" flashed from coast to coast. Church bells rang in New York, cannons boomed in San Francisco. America, at last, was bound by steel. But history's photograph told another story. The famous image shows executives shaking hands, engineers posing proudly. The Chinese laborers, who had blasted through mountains and bridged canyons, were not invited into the frame. Their absence is as loud as any whistle. We who worked knew the truth. It was their hands as much as ours that made the road real. The consequences were immediate and vast. What once took months by wagon now took days by rail. Settlers poured westward. Towns sprang up overnight along the line. Trade boomed, but so did conflict. The buffalo herds, lifeblood of the plains tribes, were slaughtered by hunters riding the rails. Native Americans were pushed further from their lands, their way of life shattered. The railroad gave birth to a new America, but it also buried the old. I remember my first ride across the completed line. I sat in a wooden car, the engine shrieking, the landscape racing past. Rivers, deserts, mountains, all conquered by iron. Felt like magic, like flight. Yet I also thought of the graves along the route, the men buried without markers, the sacrifices swallowed by progress. Now I am an old man. My hands are scarred, my back bent, but the whistle of a train still makes my heart pound. When I hear it, I smell again the tar and sweat, feel the heat of dynamite, taste the dust of the desert. I see the golden spike gleam in the sun, the flash of telegraph wires, the cheers and the silence. The iron road was more than rails and ties. It was a gamble, a miracle, a scar across the land. It was sweat and corruption, hope and grief, triumph and injustice. It was America in all its contradictions. Restless, hungry, unstoppable. And though time has buried most of the names of those who built it, every whistle that cuts across the plains is their monument. I was there. I saw the west bound to the east. I witnessed the day steel stitched a nation together. And I will never forget the sound, the scream of destiny, the cry of the iron road.